Rich Dad Poor Dad was probably one of the biggest head-turning moments that I had when it came to personal finance and investing because it's one of the first finance books that I actually read. Most notably from the book was the information that I found in chapters 2 and 4. And now, chapter 2 goes into cash flow patterns, whereas chapter 4 is talking about taxes. And Robert's explanation of cash flow patterns in Rich Dad Poor Dad is by far and away the best part of the book, hands down. However, chapter 4 is equally important. But before getting into chapters 2 and 4, it's important to first set the stage in Robert's life and how he was able to become wealthy through the knowledge he obtained. Robert was like a vast majority of families around the world. He was raised by a family that worked hard at their jobs and tried to earn what they could, but still seemed to struggle financially. And this is because the families don't have a great financial education. After all, typically the only people who will help you learn about finance are your immediate family members. And if they don't know what's going on, then that lack of knowledge gets passed to the kids who also don't know how to manage money properly. He first found out about the difference in wealth while a kid because other kids in a wealthy area that he lived in could have the newest toys and go on frequent vacations while he could not. So he asked his dad how he could become rich. His biological dad gave him the typical answer most families give their kids: stay in school, learn a lot, and get your degree, and then work hard, and then you can get a high-paying and secure job. His biological dad is what Robert referred to as his poor dad in the book. Even though poor dad made a lot of income through his job following his own advice that he gave to Robert, his family was still poor. And this might be confusing to those who haven't watched this video already or read the book, but it seems that all the money that he was earning was just going away somewhere. On the other hand, Robert eventually found what he would call his rich dad, which we'll pretend is Mr. Monopoly Man because I love his mustache. And his rich dad was his best friend's father. Rich Dad taught Robert what he knows today on how to become wealthy, and it doesn't involve high-paying job from working hard. This is where we get into chapter 2. The best part of the book is truly understanding the cash flow pattern, but to start, we'll have to define what is an asset and what is a liability. Before giving you what Robert considers an asset and liability, I want you to answer this. Which of these would you consider to be an asset, which one is a liability, and which is neither? Number 1, we have a car. Number 2 is clothes. And number 3 is the home you live in. If you're like most people, they tend to think that the car and house are assets that they own. Their idea is that since it's something that was expensive and they now have ownership of it, it makes it an asset that they control. Most people don't recognize the clothes as assets and they tend to think of it as just stuff, so it's in that middle ground of not an asset or a liability, it's merely an expense. However, according to Robert and of course Rich Dad, none of these three options are assets. The car and the home you live in would be considered a liability. The clothes would be more accurately categorized as an expense that is accurately in the middle where it's neither the asset nor liability. Let's get into what classifies an asset versus a liability according to Rich Dad. An asset is something that continually puts money into your pocket. And as a refresher, that doesn't include a job. Preferably, these assets should be something that takes a low or no amount of effort to maintain, as opposed to the 40-hour work week. But let's see how the money flows with a liability. For this, we have some source of income that comes to us, whether that's from the assets or from your job, and the liability takes that money from us and sends it away, and thus it continually sucks money away from us. Let's go back to our three examples from before: a car, clothes, and the house you live in. For the car, this is definitely a liability. If you have a car loan to pay for, then you're continually paying money to actually own the car itself. Additionally, if you have to pay gas, maintenance, and insurance, that means that you have to use all that money just to use the vehicle. It's draining your pockets every year. For clothes, this would be classified as an expense. It's typically a one-time purchase that doesn't really have any recurring costs associated with it. Unless you want to be super technical and say that washing clothes is a constant drain on your money, but let's try and be reasonable here. And then lastly, your home that you live in. And this is probably the biggest shock for most people. However, think for a minute where your money goes when you actually own your own home. This is different from owning a house and renting it out. After all, you're living in it, so you're not collecting rent from yourself. There's property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and so on. Again, this is another source that's constantly draining you of money every year. And this is where chapter 2 and 4 really shine. Understanding the cash flow patterns between the poor, middle class, and rich is what allows a person or family to become wealthy. By understanding this chart alone, you are already miles ahead of most families on the planet. So let's go over this chart. At the top is the income statement. As expected, it has income and it has expenses. And then down at the bottom is the balance sheet. This has assets and liabilities, which we went over not too long ago. What does somebody who is a poorer person's cash flow pattern actually look like? Generally speaking, most poorer individuals have a low-paying job with little benefits and tend to spend more due to building up liabilities and spending more in the expenses than they probably should. Common liabilities are credit card debt, car loans, and possibly even payday loans. So as mentioned before, they have a job and it goes into their income statement, of course, through their income. Then from the balance sheet, the liabilities start to kick in because they have loans that they need to pay off. So that $10 that they've earned previously gets chopped down to just $5. Then they have the regular expenses that they need to pay. These are things such as rent, groceries, and so on. And they often feel that they need to treat themselves because they've worked so hard. So that $5 that they're left with after the liabilities kick in, well, they don't really have anything left. And as we can see from the chart above, their assets column isn't being utilized at all. But what does a middle class person's cash flow look like? They likely have similar liabilities that the poor person's cash flow looks like, but due to their higher paying job, they have a small difference. Their income is higher due to having a higher paying job, but they still have liabilities like credit cards, mortgages, and car loans. However, with their job, they might have 401k matching plans and possibly a pension that they are working towards to help fund their retirement. So just like before, they have a job and they earn money, and that goes into the income section. Then, the liabilities need to take their cut because you need to make sure you make those payments on the loans. So they're left with just half of what they had previously. Then they have the regular bills that all the families have to have, such as groceries, gas, and so on. But they also want to have their family nights out, spending money on cool things, and so on. So they're left with just about 5% of what they earned previously. Now this money goes into their assets section in the balance sheet, courtesy of the job that they have, which incentivizes them to contribute. But here's the thing about the middle class's assets that they contribute towards. It's not to say that 401ks, IRAs, and pensions are bad. In fact, they're very tax efficient and pretty useful. But they aren't making them money right now. So, those assets are compounding and growing, but they can't be touched. They're like jailed away behind a cell, unless you want to really be heavily taxed, until many years later. Sadly, most middle class people aren't even contributing that much to begin with, meaning that the money that they are earning each year effectively only comes from their job. If they suddenly lost their job, they wouldn't be able to have an alternative source of income, but they would still have to pay for all the expenses and liabilities that they had previously. Now finally, what does a wealthy person's cash flow look like? For this, we're going to have to look a little bit deeper at the type of assets being bought. What kind of assets do the ultra-rich buy? The assets which constantly put money in your pocket while requiring little to no effort on time on your end. These are sources like personal businesses that you buy and hire managers to run efficiently. This can be done with purchasing an existing business or starting your own. And in this case, stocks are similar because you're buying ownership of a company without putting in the work yourself. Maybe you want other people to pay you money for debt. Things like bonds can keep giving you money through interest. Maybe you wrote a hit song and can collect royalties from that song. You put the upfront effort in so that all the back end effort can be collected through passive income. In a similar way, you can do that with software and use it to have businesses that pay you yearly subscriptions for all the upfront work that you did at the start. Buying homes for other people and collecting rent transforms a house into an asset because you're collecting money from it. Did you make an invention and want to collect on the intellectual property while you just sit back and do nothing? Or maybe you want to sell it to a corporation for a lump sum payment. There are so many ways that the wealthy can create or buy assets that passively put money into their pocket. But it gets better from here. What does this type of asset building look like on the cash flow quadrants? It starts with some number of assets, and as mentioned previously, these generate income, so it'll head right up to the top. And just like everyone else, they have some liabilities and some expenses, so it'll get taken out. But here's the difference between the middle class, the poor, and the rich. They save a lot more money and buy more assets with it. So before, when they had 2, now they purchase 2 more. And you can take a guess as to what will happen next. Those 4 assets generate twice as much income, but the process is the exact same. After all the expenses, it goes back to the assets to double them again, and now we're left with 8 with this round. And as you can see, this cycle keeps continuing and compounding on top of itself. And this is how the rich are able to maintain their wealth and continue growing it fast relative to the rest of the world. They keep utilizing their assets to go into their income, they save their money, and buy more assets with it later. This, above all else, is the lesson that Rich Dad taught Robert when he was a child, and his question of how can I be rich was answered. We know that the wealthy are looking to build up their assets rather than working jobs. So if that was just chapter 2, then what's in chapter 4? And this is going into taxes. And I'm sorry if I just bored more than half of my audience with such a short sentence, but it's true. Chapter 4 is about the power of corporations compared to employees. In fact, there's a quote in the book where it says, "My rich dad just played the game smart, and he did it through corporations." The biggest secret of the rich. Well, what is this secret? I don't want to get super tax savvy in this video because political candidates love changing them so frequently. What a total headache. But I'll give the general idea that's persisted for so many years and is likely to continue for many years further. In general, here's the big difference between corporations and regular people when it comes to taxes. People earn money, get taxed on the money, and then spend what's left, where of course they're going to get taxed again for anything that they buy. Corporations, on the other hand, they earn money, then spend money, where yes, they of course still pay tax on the things that they buy, and then at the end, pay taxes on what's left over. And this is where tax deductions come into effect. It might not be obvious how big of a difference this is, so I'll explain a little further. As just an example, let's look at Amazon. Here's a screenshot from CBS News on Amazon. Just let the difference in the numbers sink in. And more amazingly, they managed to pay actually no federal income tax in other years. What the heck is going on, and why is this allowed? The difference that CBS is pointing out is attributed to their federal tax rate. How is it that a company making billions of dollars only has a federal tax rate of 1.2%? You see, Amazon was spending lots of money on research and development and also their regular business operations. So, going back to what was said previously, corporations earn, spend money, then get taxed for federal taxes. Then, we get to utilize the beautiful tax deductions to reduce the tax bill that we have to pay. So imagine a simple laundromat business. In order to run, office supplies, equipment, furniture, your lease, utilities, and so on are required. And obviously any business you have would have to be looked at with the updated IRS code on what can be deducted, but I think you get the main idea. You have something that you need to run your business, and then those expenses can get reduced for your tax burden. Well, why would this be allowed? The theory is that if a company is spending lots of money to improve its earnings today, then it would make even more money in the future, which seems obvious. So the government allows the businesses to earn, spend money, then pay taxes after deductions, because this way they can improve their business. And with a better business, they earn more, which would eventually, when the company decides to slow down and stop upgrading itself and just collect all the earnings, means that the government would collect bigger paychecks years later. And it's this secret in Chapter 4 in combination with Chapter 2 that was the biggest and best part of the book by a long shot. It's a big motivation to make people want to start their own businesses. But how long did this take to read? It'll be around 3 hours from start to finish. It's pretty quick and it's easy for anybody interested in finance. It's no wonder it's his bestseller. Now, what would you like to see me do next? Leave a comment on what other books you would like me to do in the future. If you enjoyed the video all the way to the end, subscribe and hit the bell to stay up to date on the future videos that I'm going to make. And if you hit the like button so that other people can see the video as well, that would be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.